It was a chilly evening when Sarah found herself rummaging through an old wooden box in her grandmother's attic. The box was full of forgotten trinkets, dusty books, and old photographs that had long been hidden from the world. Sarah, a curious and adventurous young woman, had always loved exploring the nooks and crannies of her grandmother's house. Her grandmother, a kind woman with a vast collection of memories, had always shared stories of the past. But there was one period in her life that she refused to talk about, the time when she was a young girl living in a house Sarah had never heard of. As Sarah sifted through the yellowed photographs, one caught her eye. It was a picture of her grandmother as a young woman, probably no older than 16, standing in front of a grand old house. The house was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen, tall, imposing, with an eerie, almost haunting presence. The windows were dark and cold, and the shadows cast by the trees seemed to stretch across the entire front yard. There was something unsettling about the way the house stood in the background, as if it were watching her grandmother. Sarah stared at the photograph, intrigued. The house looked familiar, but she couldn't place where she had seen it before. The more she looked at it, the more she felt an inexplicable sense of unease. It was as though the house was hiding something, something that it didn't want anyone to know. "Grandma," Sarah called out, her voice echoing through the attic. "What is this house? I don't remember you ever talking about it." Her grandmother, who had been sitting in the living room downstairs, appeared in the doorway of the attic. She looked at the photograph in Sarah's hands, and her expression shifted instantly. The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by something else, something darker, more distant. "That house," her grandmother said quietly, taking a step closer. "I've never spoken of it for a reason." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "What happened there? Why didn't you ever tell me about it?" Her grandmother sighed, walking over to the box Sarah had been going through. She sat down beside her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the photograph. She stared at it for a long moment, her fingers brushing the edges of the old photo. "That house," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "was where I grew up. It was beautiful once, but things changed. Strange things began to happen, things I couldn't explain." Sarah leaned in closer, her curiosity piqued. "What kind of strange things?" Her grandmother took a deep breath, clearly hesitant to speak, as though the memories were too painful to relive. Finally, she spoke. "People started to vanish, not just from the town, but from the house itself. I remember hearing voices late at night, whispering from the walls, calling my name. My parents would disappear for hours, sometimes days, and when they returned, they were different. They didn't speak about it, but I could feel something was wrong. There was something in that house, something evil. I knew I had to leave, but I couldn't. It was as if the house wouldn't let me go." Sarah's heart began to race as she listened to her grandmother's story. She had heard of haunted houses before, of course, but hearing about one so close to her own family was something entirely different. The photograph in her hands suddenly felt much heavier. "Why didn't you ever leave?" Sarah asked softly. Her grandmother's face darkened. "I tried, but there were forces at work. One night, I went to the attic, just like you. I thought I heard something up there, and when I got to the top of the stairs, I saw a figure standing in the corner.